So I think so far you had 154 victims in Beirut, and 1/4 of them were Syrians. And I just think it's absolutely tragic that even outside the war zone, they can't escape this kind of stuff. And I just wanted to say that because I don't know if you guys were aware. Protests have been taking place now against the government. You have a lot of people coming out to Martyr Square, which is Saht al-Shuhada. So a few months ago, I covered the protests that were happening then as well against the government, against corruption. And yesterday, I think you had like 10,000 people that were out protesting. You have people saying that, oh, look, the entire government is corrupt. We have to get rid of all of them, and they're all to blame. We need new elections, and we just need to get rid of everybody. But everything is Hezbollah's fault. What? Hold on a second. How is everybody corrupt, but it's only Hezbollah's fault? Like, which one is it? This shit makes no sense. There are definitely people out there. There are definitely a lot of Lebanese who are sick and tired of corrupt government officials, of corrupt members of parliament, of the nepotism, of the incompetence, the embezzlement, the corruption. 100%, sure. But don't fall for this trap where they're trying to make it just about Hezbollah, as if Hezbollah are the ones that are responsible for this. No. Hezbollah do not own any banks or financial institutions or lucrative business dealings. Hezbollah are not the ones who've been in government for 50 fucking years, putting their sons and daughters and cousins and uncles and nephews and nieces in their own posts once they leave. Hezbollah are not the only party in this government. The whole premise behind having representation from every kind of sect and religious background was that everybody's involved. So if you're going to talk about corruption, you better talk about everybody. That's the whole point. Just in the last 48 hours, plenty has happened. You had 7 members of parliament that resigned. You've had 2 ministers that resigned. So the Minister of Information and the Minister for the Environment. The protesters, someone got a noose and put cardboard cutouts of these politicians. And it's just crazy, man, because they stormed the Ministry of Energy. They stormed the Foreign Ministry. They stormed a couple of banks. And look at what happened when they stormed the Foreign Ministry. Okay, so I'm just going to read you this paragraph. So the Lebanese army drove out a group of protesters who had taken over the Foreign Ministry building in central Beirut hours earlier. The demonstrators, led by retired army officers, had stormed the building and declared it the, quote, headquarters of the revolution. But they were expelled 3 hours later when large army reinforcements muscled in. I mean, this is so comically hilarious. Dude, this is even more pathetic than that one guy who was president of Syria for like 1 day. And there was another guy who was president of Syria for like 3 days. You got to understand something, man. In the 1950s and the 1960s, there were so many coups in Syria. I'm talking dozens, to the point that you had one guy who was president for like 24 hours. And then he gets replaced by... This is even more pathetic. That lasted 3 hours. These retired old farts coming out and trying to stir more chaos and pretend that they're spearheading the revolution. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It really is. It's gotten to the point where they were storming these ministries. The reason these protesters were storming these ministries was to destroy government documents implicating the other parties of corruption, of embezzlement, of extortion, of incompetence. Do you understand? So the ones that are in opposition to Hezbollah, the parties being run by Ja'ja, by Jumblat, all of these other parties that are in opposition to Aoun and Nasrallah, they were sending protesters into these ministries to steal documents, to destroy them, so that they cannot be brought to justice. Because what the government announced was that within the week, within 5 days, we are going to bring everybody to justice. They arrested the director of the port in Beirut. They put a bunch of other administrative officials that were working in the port under house arrest. And they said, we will bring everybody to justice. Everyone who was complicit, who was involved, they will be brought to justice. And so these people are scared shitless. And they were going back and destroying documents dating back as far as 1992. They're trying to hide their own corruption. And at the same time, they're trying to provoke an international response. They're trying to provoke Western involvement, right? They're calling for, oh, we need an international investigation, which is a cloak upon, oh, let's bring in the Americans. Oh, let's bring in more of the Westerners to administer us, to take over. Let's put the government in their hands. And even the US Embassy in Beirut was announcing this on Twitter. Take a look. They're saying, the Lebanese people have suffered too much and deserve to have leaders who listen to them and change course to respond to popular demands for transparency and accountability. And then underneath they continue, we support them in their right to peaceful protest and encourage all involved to refrain from violence. Yo, you should tell that to your own government, okay? You encourage peaceful protest in Lebanon, but not in the US, where you've been beating the crap out of everybody who gets on the streets and tear gassing them. Do you see? This is the official account from the United States Embassy in Lebanon, in Beirut. Do you see how they are meddling openly in foreign affairs? In case this isn't abundantly clear to those of you out there, this is a very, very big faux pas, okay? Not only is this extremely rude, not only is this extremely impolite, but it is straight up meddling in other countries' affairs. Your job as a diplomat, your job as an ambassador, your job as a foreign dignitary who's sent to a mission in another country is not to meddle in that country's affairs, okay? And this is not the first time. You had the US ambassador to Lebanon doing the same thing months ago when you had the protests in Sahd al-Shuhada in Martyr Square. She was doing the same thing. She was encouraging people and trying to stir up even more chaos and protests. And in Syria, during the start of the war, the US ambassador to Syria was literally going down amidst the protesters and protesting with people against the government. Motherfucker, you are here to represent the US to the government, not to come and protest against them. I mean, this is unbelievable. Like, they have zero fucking manners, zero shame. No diplomat on earth does that. Can you imagine if the Lebanese ambassador or the Syrian ambassador got out on the streets right now with you guys protesting? Mike Pompeo would lose his shit. Okay? Can you imagine if that happened? Actually, I'm not even sure if Syria still has diplomatic relations with the US anymore. I don't think they do, because you have an account on Twitter that says the US embassy in Syria, and it's just a Twitter account. There's no fucking embassy there anymore. So, but regardless, any other country, to India, for example, China, oh God, that's an even better one. Could you imagine if the Chinese ambassador went down and started protesting with you guys in Portland? Donald Trump would lose his shit. But it's okay for them to do that. It's okay for them to get involved in our affairs. Like, even as literal diplomats, in the name of diplomacy, they commit foreign aggression, completely defying and turning upside down the very meaning of the word diplomacy. Unreal. Unreal. And so, I'm not surprised by this. I'm not surprised by this because, as I told you, we saw the same thing happen in Syria. We see the same thing happening in Hong Kong, right? We see the same thing where the United States is stirring up, encouraging these protesters in Hong Kong who are just right-wingers trying to bring back British colonialism. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And they do the same thing in Venezuela, right? Propping up this puppet Guaido that no one has even heard of. On the surface of things, this is a farce. This is a joke compared to funding jihadists. I mean, when you put the two together, this is a joke in comparison. But just the blatant hypocrisy that they would even get involved in another country's affairs, and on top of it, talk about peaceful protesting and refraining from violence. Go deal with your own goddamn government, cracking down on protesters and treating them like dirt and cracking their skulls and tear gassing them, okay? Go deal with your own affairs. The US is one of the last countries on the face of the planet to lecture anyone else about protests. And so anyway, you know, in Western media, they're reporting this as just pro-democracy protests, which is the same thing that they did in Syria, the same thing that they did in Venezuela, the same thing that they did in Hong Kong. But they're actually getting involved with it. They're actually trying to stir up more chaos. And the whole goal behind this is not to actually bring democracy to the Lebanese. They just want to get rid of Hezbollah. They just want more international intervention, more foreign intervention and meddling inside of Lebanese affairs. That's what it comes down to in the end. Anytime the United States approves of something, specifically the State Department, you know that it's nefarious. You know that it's nefarious. No way in hell they approve of something that's actually genuinely good for the people of the global south. Do not kid yourself for 1 second, man. So just pay attention to that, okay? Pay attention to how this is being framed in the Western media and even inside of Lebanon, because you have nefarious actors that are dying for the United States to come and get involved. They're dying for Israel to come and get involved. They're dying for more foreign intervention, for the French to come and rule them, or even the Ottomans. And they're taking advantage of this horrible tragedy where 154 people died, 43 of them Syrians. It's really disgusting, right? I told you, even if an asteroid hit the earth tomorrow morning, they would blame Hezbollah. And they're also really angry because when Emmanuel Macron, the French president, came to visit, right, when he got off the plane doing his little Charles de Gaulle impression, he dared to meet with Hezbollah. And so this is a very taboo thing to do, right? This is a very controversial thing to do, especially as a Western leader, because, for example, in Germany, the Israeli lobby got them to ban Hezbollah, even though Hezbollah has no relation to Germany. Nonetheless, Macron recognized them, right? So he refused to meet with Jumblat and Jaja on their own. The point here is that they are angered by this, that he would grant legitimacy de facto just by having a meeting, a sit down with Hezbollah present. This has angered the ones that really want to get rid of Hezbollah and are taking advantage of this tragedy. And that's all I'm going to say. So just pay attention to how this is being reported in the West, because, you know, anytime they try to portray something as being pro-democratic or 100% grassroots, and they approve of it, usually it means the United States has some nefarious interests involved, and the UK as well. Like, let's be real here. Let's be real. Even the IMF is getting involved now. So previously, they were saying that they're not going to give Lebanon any more money. They're denying them loans. And now, IMF chief renews call for reforms. So Georgieva, the head of the International Monetary Fund, warned Lebanon again it would not get any loans from the institution unless it reformed its government. The purpose of the IMF, the purpose of the World Bank, their purpose is to handcuff these developing countries by giving out these loans, knowing that they can't repay them, and in exchange, force upon them austerity, force upon them really difficult economic hardships, force upon them political reform. This is one of the tools of imperialism, right? So they come and say like, oh, we're here to help you. We'll give you loans so you can develop your country, knowing that they can't repay them. And then when they default on the loans, they're like, oh, well, okay, since you can't repay them, change your government. Put this guy in. Put this pro-Western guy in power. This is another way of pressuring countries in the global south into conforming to US and Western hegemony. Oh yeah, they're very fucking smart, man. They thought of this shit really well. Yeah. So they want Lebanon to be molded in a way that is suitable and conforms to Western US hegemony before they give them any more money, knowing full well that Lebanon is going through hyperinflation, unemployment, COVID. Their currency is suffering also because of the sanctions in Syria. They can't trade. They have a shortage of foreign currencies, and they're in desperate need of reconstruction regardless, and now especially after this port explosion. So do you see how these institutions screw over poor countries? It's not done just with bombs. It's done also by playing with their economies and their livelihoods and their development. Oh yeah. They're absolutely cunning and evil. Just to conclude, what happened a few days ago is awful. And there are many parties that are not just seeking to hide that they are to blame, to hide their incompetence, their corruption, but also to take advantage of this situation and try to bring in Western intervention, foreign intervention, and get rid of Hezbollah, which is frankly the only reason South Lebanon is even called South Lebanon, and get rid of this buffer that is between them and Israel, right? So there you go.